Sarah and I were the kind of friends people envied. We shared a studio, clients, and a history that spanned 2 decades. There was a rhythm to our life, a predictable comfort in the way we finished each other's sentences and business moves. Our firm was growing, stable, and for the first time, we were looking at a horizon that didn't involve constant struggle. We were a unit, a closed system where trust wasn't a question, it was the gravity that held everything together. We spent our Tuesday nights debating the ethics of high-end design and the future we were building. I thought I knew every corner of her mind, every motive behind her smile. It was a perfect equilibrium, or so I convinced myself. We were untouchable, 2 halves of a whole that the world couldn't break. But even in the brightest light, some shadows remain hidden. We were about to find out how deep they went. The first hairline crack appeared during the Meridian contract. A $50 million deal that Sarah started handling alone. She seemed different, agitated, secretive. She spoke of realigning incentives and modernizing our structure. I noticed her emails were encrypted now, her meetings held behind closed doors. She was under pressure, and the Sarah I knew was being replaced by someone sharper, someone more desperate. I didn't ask why. I watched. Every decision she made seemed to carve a little more space between us, a distance that wasn't there before. The tension in the office was palpable, a low hum of anxiety that followed her everywhere. I realized then that the pressure wasn't coming from the client. It was coming from within. She was building something, and I was no longer the architect. I was the obstacle. But what she didn't realize was that an obstacle is only as strong as its foundation. I found a folder she had misplaced on the server. The file was a proposal to the board, one that didn't include my name. It was an eviction notice disguised as a corporate restructuring. I stared at the screen, the blue light etching the lines into my face. This wasn't just a business move. It was a surgical removal. Sarah was quietly isolating me, redirecting our key clients to a new entity I didn't even know existed. She was telling them I was stepping back for health reasons, a lie wrapped in a concern. I felt the allies I had cultivated for years drifting away, their eyes avoiding mine in the break room. The office I had built was becoming a foreign country. I was being airlocked out of my own life. I realized that my silence was my only remaining currency. I didn't confront her, I didn't scream, I just stood in the center of the void she was creating. Sarah called me to ask about dinner, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. I realized then that she was already grieving the version of me she was killing. Language began to replace the truth. Sarah started using the board's language, words like synergy, optimization, and risk management. She was reframing her betrayal as a necessity for the firm's survival. In our private meetings, she was still my best friend, but in the official minutes, I was a legacy asset. The distortion was total. She was creating a paper trail that painted me as the one who was checked out, the one who was failing our clients. I watched her manipulate the narrative until the truth was just an inconvenience. She was so convinced of her own spin that she started to believe it herself. She was the hero of her own story, saving the firm from my supposed stagnation. I realized that the only way to fight a distortion is to provide a higher resolution of reality. I began to record everything, not the meetings, but the discrepancies. I started to build a mirror that would reflect her own image back at her, but only when it was too late to turn away. The board meeting was moved up. Sarah didn't tell me. I showed up anyway. The room went silent when I walked in. Sarah's face didn't slip. She just adjusted her chair. She had manipulated the seating chart, the agenda, and the expectations. She spent 30 minutes presenting my designs as her reimagined vision. I watched the board members nod, their incentives perfectly aligned with the growth she was promising. She was playing them like an instrument. She had promised them a future where I was no longer a cost center. I saw the man in the corner, an auditor I had never met, his briefcase heavy with the documents Sarah had provided to bury me. She was so close to the finish line, she could taste the victory. She had maneuvered everyone into position. She thought she had accounted for every variable, every risk. She thought she knew exactly how I would react, with anger, with a scene, with a lawyer. But I gave her none of that. I just watched the auditor. He wasn't looking at the presentation. He was looking at the small red light on the server tower. I had given him his own set of keys. Sarah finished her speech and waited for the applause. The betrayal was finally public. Sarah stood up and formally moved to dissolve our partnership. She cited irreconcilable differences in strategic vision. She looked me in the eye, and for a split second, I saw the Sarah I had loved. Then she blinked, and the predator returned. She had prepared a severance package that was essentially a gag order. She was buying my silence with the money she had stolen from our shared accounts. The board chairman looked at me, waiting for the explosion. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes wide, almost pleading for me to make it easy for her, to be the villain she had described. I didn't speak. I just reached into my bag and pulled out a single, unencrypted drive. I didn't hand it to the board. I handed it to the auditor. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten under the table. She had forgotten the one thing about a closed system. If you change one variable, the whole equation fails. I had changed the auditor's incentive. I hadn't hired him to find my mistakes. I had hired him to find hers. Sarah asked me what was on the drive. I told her it was just a backup. The true impact wasn't visible yet. The auditor began to read. Sarah sat back, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. She thought she had scrubbed the server. She thought her private entity was invisible, but she had used the firm's credit line to seed her new venture. A small oversight for a genius, a fatal one for a thief. As the auditor scrolled through the transactions, the room's temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The board members started looking at their own phones, checking their own exposure. The hidden damage Sarah had done to the firm's reputation was being laid bare. She had over-leveraged our assets to buy her own future. She wasn't just replacing me, she was hollowing us out. I watched the colour drain from her face as she realised that the mirror I had built wasn't just reflecting her, it was focusing the light. The silence in the room was the sound of a reputation being dismantled. Sarah tried to speak, to spin the numbers, but the distortion field was gone. She was just a woman in a charcoal blouse, caught in the headlights of her own ambition. The chairman closed the folder. Sarah looked at me. I looked at the window. The storm had finally arrived. I had quietly prepared a response that went beyond the boardroom. I hadn't just found her embezzlement, I had enabled it. I had left the server vulnerabilities open. I had authorized the credit increases she needed to bury herself. I was the one who had invited the auditor. Every move she had made to isolate me had been recorded and categorized. I had already contacted the regulators. I had already briefed the competitors she was trying to court. I was the one holding the keys, and I had just changed the locks. Sarah called me 5 minutes after the meeting was adjourned. Her voice was shaking, her language finally honest. She asked me how I could do this. I told her I hadn't done anything. I had simply stopped protecting her from herself. I was the gravity that had held her up, and I had just let go. I watched her from my car as she walked out of the building. She looked small, diminished. She looked like a stranger. I realized then that the revenge wasn't the goal. It was just the consequence of her choices. I had one more call to make, a call to the police. Sarah wasn't going home. She was going into the system. For a week, it appeared the conflict was over. Sarah was under investigation, the firm was being stabilized, and I was back in control. The board offered me her shares. The clients returned, their apologies as empty as their earlier silence. It felt like a victory. I sat in our office, the one we had built together, and for a moment I could almost hear her laughter. The system had absorbed the damage and continued. I was the hero now, the one who had saved the firm from the internal threat. But the resolution was false. Every advantage I had gained had created a new weakness. I had used Sarah's own tactics to destroy her. I had manipulated, distorted, and betrayed the person I loved most. I was the master of the system now, but the system was hollow. I had won the war, but I had lost the reason I was fighting. I realized that Sarah and I were now exactly the same. We were both predators who had mistaken incentives for intimacy. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked older, harder, and entirely alone. The truth was finally clear. The bridge was gone, and I was on the other side, but there was no one left to meet me. I waited for the final shoe to drop. The auditor hadn't left the city. The final payoff landed with irreversible consequences. I didn't just trade one friend for another, I traded my soul for a seat at the table. Sarah is in a minimum security facility now. She learned never to betray anyone again because she lost everything: her career, her reputation, and her history. We don't speak, but we share a silence that is louder than words. We treat each other with the cold respect of two survivors who know exactly what the other is capable of. I learned that the system always wins. I thought I was the player, but I was just a piece. The auditor is my new partner now. He has his own price, and I am the only one who can pay it. I have become the new warden of my own prison. The damage has spread beyond Sarah. It has changed the way I look at every smile, every incentive. I am untouchable now, and that is my permanent punishment. I looked at the auditor as he walked into my office. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a folder, a proposal for a new project. I opened it and saw the first line. Realigning incentives. I smiled. It was the most honest expression I had ever had. Welcome to the system. The cost of silence was everything, and I was more than willing to pay, for now.